The leather chair groaned as James leaned back, his tailored suit crisp and precise, a stark contrast to the smugness curling at the edges of his lips. "Emily, you have to understand," he said smoothly, his voice laced with feigned patience. "Handling this kind of money takes experience, business acumen, things you simply don't have." I sat across from him in his home office, hands clasped tightly in my lap, willing them to stay steady. Scattered across the glossy mahogany desk were the inheritance documents from my grandmother's estate, $12 million in assets, properties, and investments that James was so eager to claim. "My name is Emily Chin. I am 42 years old, and I am watching my husband of 15 years try to manipulate me into handing over my fortune." The same man who had spent years carefully dismantling my confidence, making me doubt my own judgment, was now showing his true face. James adjusted his tie with practiced ease. "I've already spoken to our lawyer. The power of attorney paperwork is ready. Once you sign, I'll handle everything. You won't have to worry your pretty little head about it." The condescension made my stomach turn, but I kept my face unreadable. This wasn't new. James had always wrapped control in the guise of care, casual comments about my spending, subtle encouragement to quit my job because he made enough for both of us, little criticisms that, over time, chipped away at my confidence. But what James didn't know, what I made sure he didn't know, was that I wasn't the same woman he had married. The shift had begun the day I received my grandmother's final letter. "My dearest Emily," she had written, "with this gift comes responsibility, but also opportunity. Trust yourself, you are stronger and smarter than they've led you to believe." Those words had hit me like a jolt, awakening something long buried. My grandmother had always seen James for what he was. She had never outright condemned him, but in her quiet way, she had been preparing me for this moment, teaching me about investments, business, and most importantly, self-reliance. The day after I was notified of my inheritance, I met with Sarah Chin, no relation, a financial advisor my grandmother had trusted. "James thought I was at yoga. Your grandmother built this fortune from nothing," Sarah had told me in our first meeting, "and she left it to you, not your husband, not anyone else, you." From that moment on, I had been preparing weekly meetings with Sarah, a consultation with my own lawyer, one James knew nothing about, quietly transferring my personal savings to a separate account, documenting every manipulative comment, every move James made to tighten his grip. Through careful investigation, I had learned that James had been making inquiries about my inheritance even before the will was read, discreetly speaking to financial advisors about how to protect the assets. What he really meant was how to control them. Now, as he spoke to me like a child who needed guidance, laying out his plans as if they were inevitable, I felt a surprising calm settle over me. The fear he had nurtured in me for years had burned away, leaving only certainty in its place. "Are you even listening, Emily?" His voice cut through my thoughts, irritation creeping in. "This is important. We need to get the paperwork signed before the estate is fully settled." I met his gaze, my expression unreadable. "So, you want power of attorney over my inheritance?" James smiled that polished, patronizing smile. "Exactly. You know I only want what's best for us, for our future." What he didn't know was that I had already secured my future, and he wasn't in it. The meetings with Sarah hadn't just been about managing money. We had built an airtight plan to protect my assets. The inheritance was secured in a trust, one that explicitly prevented anyone from accessing it without my direct consent. 2 weeks ago, I had moved my personal savings into a separate account at a different bank. But the real shock for James, the one that would shatter his carefully laid plans, was yet to come. "You seem distracted," he noted, studying me. "Is everything okay?" I forced a small smile. "I just need time to think. This is a big decision." He nodded, stepping around the desk to place his hands on my shoulders. His touch, once reassuring, now felt like a weight I couldn't wait to shed. "Don't overthink it, honey. You know I'll take care of everything." That night, as he slept soundly beside me, convinced he had me right where he wanted, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about what was coming, the moment he would realize I had outmaneuvered him, the moment his confidence would crack. The thought sent a thrill through me. By morning, James was already in his office, phone pressed to his ear, his voice carried through the closed door. "Yes, everything's proceeding as planned," he was saying. "She'll sign the papers this week. No, she has no idea about any of it. Trust me, I know how to handle my wife." A familiar twist of anger tightened in my stomach, but this time, it was met with something new: determination. I pulled out my phone, pressed record, and quietly captured every word, just one more piece of evidence to add to my growing collection. Later that day, I slipped out of the house, heading to a small cafe across town. James thought I was at my book club. He had no idea what was coming. I had spent months crafting this plan, every detail meticulously set in place. "Everything's ready," Sarah said, sliding a folder across the cafe table. "Are you absolutely sure?" I opened it, scanning the documents inside: bank statements, transfer records, legal filings, undeniable proof of James's attempts to manipulate his way into controlling my inheritance. "I'm sure," I said, snapping the folder shut. "He's left me no choice." Sarah studied me, her expression serious. "The meeting with the estate lawyers is set for tomorrow. James still thinks it's just a routine signing, doesn't he?" I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding me. Yes, he has no idea what's coming. That evening, James was in an uncharacteristically good mood. He ordered from my favorite restaurant, poured an expensive bottle of wine, and was overly attentive. It was all so predictable, his way of softening me up before the meeting. "I've been thinking," he said as we sat down to eat, "once we finalize everything with the inheritance, we should take that trip to Europe you've always wanted." I smiled, playing along. "That sounds lovely." He reached across the table, taking my hand, his thumb stroking my palm in what he probably thought was a comforting gesture. "I know all this legal stuff has been stressful for you," he murmured, "but after tomorrow, you won't have to worry about any of it. I'll handle everything." I squeezed his hand gently, thinking about how different things would be in 24 hours. "You're right, James," I said softly. "After tomorrow, everything will be different." That night, I watched him go through his usual bedtime routine, checking his phone one last time, laying out his suit for the morning, making sure everything was in its place. James had always been about control, about crafting the perfect image. "Big day tomorrow," he reminded me, slipping under the covers. "Try to get some rest." I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, my mind sifting through the past 15 years, the way he had isolated me from my friends, how he'd discouraged me from working, the casual, cutting remarks disguised as concern. But I also thought about my grandmother, her quiet strength, her wisdom. She had seen this coming long before I had. "Remember, Emily," she had once told me, "true strength isn't about controlling others, it's about reclaiming control over yourself." Tomorrow, James would finally learn what that meant. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I watched James knot his silk tie in the mirror, adjusting his cuffs with practiced precision, every movement deliberate, controlled. "Wear something professional," he said, eyeing my casual attire with disapproval. "First impressions matter, even if it's just a signing." I nodded, suppressing a smirk at his assumption. While he finished getting ready, I stepped into my bedroom and changed into the navy suit my grandmother had helped me pick out months ago. "Every warrior needs proper armor," she had said with a knowing smile. The drive to the law office was quiet. James stole a few glances at me, probably mistaking my silence for nerves. His hand patted my knee in what he no doubt thought was reassurance. "Just follow my lead," he said as we pulled into the parking lot. "Let me do the talking." The offices of Morrison Associates occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building. As we stepped into the lobby, James squared his shoulders, slipping into his role effortlessly. "Mr. and Mrs. Preston," the receptionist greeted us. "They're ready for you in the main conference room." James strode ahead, confident as ever, but when we entered the room, his steps faltered. The long table wasn't empty. Seated around it were several people: Sarah Chin, my financial advisor; Marcus Wong, my personal attorney; and at the head of the table, Catherine Morrison, senior partner of the firm. James hesitated, his jaw tightening. "What's going on?" "Please, have a seat," Catherine said smoothly, gesturing to the chairs. "We have quite a bit to discuss." I walked to the head of the table and sat down. James stood frozen for a beat before taking a chair, his movements slower, more cautious, his knuckles whitened where they gripped the armrests. Catherine opened a folder, her voice crisp. "Mrs. Preston has asked us to review some concerning matters regarding her inheritance, and your recent efforts to secure power of attorney." James's head snapped toward me, his mask of control slipping just slightly. "Emily, what is this?" I met his gaze, my voice steady. Let me explain. I leaned forward slightly. I know everything, James. The calls to your lawyers about controlling my inheritance before my grandmother even passed. The inquiries into having me declared financially incompetent. The offshore accounts you've been setting up. His face paled for half a second before he forced out a scoff. That's ridiculous. I've only been trying to protect our interests, James insisted, his voice rising in desperation. Our interests? Sarah Chen cut him off, sliding a document across the table with deliberate slowness. Is that why you've been making inquiries about transferring Mrs. Preston's inheritance into accounts that only you could access? James's jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. Emily, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted, my fingers steady as I pulled out my phone. In fact, let me play something for everyone. I pressed play, and his voice rang out in the otherwise quiet room. Yes, everything's proceeding as planned. She'll sign the papers this week. No, she has no idea about any of it. Trust me, I know how to handle my wife. The blood drained from James's face as the recording continued, revealing his detailed schemes to gain control of my inheritance through whatever manipulative means necessary. That's just taken out of context, he sputtered, his words faltering as panic flashed in his eyes. Catherine Morrison leaned forward, her gaze sharp. Mr. Preston, we have documented evidence of multiple attempts to fraudulently gain control of your wife's inheritance. Would you care to explain that? James's composure cracked completely. Emily, he hissed, his voice low and urgent, you have no idea what you're doing. You need me, you've always needed me. I met his gaze steadily, my voice calm despite the rush of adrenaline. No, James, I don't need you, I never did. What I needed was to see you for who you really are. Marcus Wong cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the tension. Mrs. Preston has already taken steps to protect her inheritance through a series of trusts that you cannot access. Additionally, he paused, sliding another set of documents across the table. These are divorce papers. James stared at the papers, his face contorting with rage. Divorce? You can't be serious, after everything I've done for you. Everything you've done to me, I corrected, my voice steady and sharp. The manipulation, the control, the constant undermining of my confidence. It stops now. You'll never manage without me, he spat, his carefully maintained facade crumbling to reveal his true desperation. You're nothing without me, nothing. I stood, my hands flat on the table, my eyes locked with his. That's where you're wrong, James. I'm not nothing. I'm my grandmother's granddaughter, and she taught me better than to let someone like you control my life. Sarah Chen spoke up, her tone measured but firm. Mrs. Preston has demonstrated remarkable financial acumen over the past 6 months. She's already made several successful investment decisions that have increased her inheritance by 15%. James's head whipped around in disbelief. 6 months? You've been planning this for 6 months? I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Actually, I said, pausing for effect, Grandmother and I had been planning this for years. She saw right through you from the beginning. Every lunch, every shopping trip, she was teaching me, preparing me for this moment. Catherine Morrison, her expression unyielding, pulled out another stack of papers. Mr. Preston, given the evidence of your attempted financial manipulation, we are prepared to file charges unless you agree to an uncontested divorce with the terms Mrs. Preston has outlined. James snatched the papers from the table, his face turning bright red as he skimmed through them. You can't be serious, he muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. You expect me to just walk away with nothing? Not nothing, I corrected, my voice unshaken. You can keep your own assets, but my inheritance, my grandmother's legacy, that stays with me, where it belongs. This is insane, he muttered, his voice barely more than a growl as he ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. You've all lost your minds. No, James, I said quietly, for the first time in 15 years, I'm thinking clearly. You have until the end of the week to decide, sign the papers and walk away, or face fraud charges, your choice. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and shot me one last venomous look. You'll regret this, he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. You have no idea what you're doing. As he stormed out of the conference room, I felt the weight of years of manipulation and self-doubt lift from my shoulders. Every moment I had spent questioning myself, trying to live up to his expectations, all of it melted away with each step he took out the door. Catherine waited until the door clicked shut behind him before speaking. Are you all right, Mrs. Preston? I nodded, surprised by the surge of relief that washed over me. Yes, I am. For the first time in a very long time, I really am. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and final paperwork. With overwhelming evidence of his attempts to manipulate me, James signed the divorce papers. He moved out of our house, my house now, taking only his personal belongings. I heard through mutual friends that he was spreading rumors that I'd had some sort of breakdown, that I was making a huge mistake, but his words no longer had the same power over me. Sarah helped me take full control of my investments, and, true to my grandmother's teachings, I proved to be more than capable at managing my own finances. The inheritance wasn't just about money, it was about freedom, independence, the opportunity to finally become who I was always meant to be. One evening, about a month after the confrontation, I was sorting through some old boxes when I found a photo album. Inside was a picture from my wedding day, James and me, smiling at the camera, looking perfect, polished, but what caught my eye wasn't us, it was my grandmother in the background, her gaze steady and knowing. She had seen it all coming, had prepared me long before I ever realized I needed preparing. Her inheritance wasn't just about wealth, it was about giving me the strength to stand on my own. I closed the album and walked to my home office, once James's domain, now my space. On the wall hung a photo of my grandmother and me, taken just months before she passed away. Her eyes sparkled with the same determination I now carried every day. Thank you, I whispered to her image, for everything. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, another investment opportunity to discuss. I read the details with a smile. James had thought I couldn't manage money, thought I couldn't make decisions, thought I couldn't survive without him. But here I was. Not just surviving, thriving. Managing my inheritance, making my own choices, and finally living life on my terms. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities I never would have imagined when I was trapped in James's web of control. It wasn't always easy, independence never is. But it was mine. And that made all the difference.